have never come across Marketers Code before. It's basically a community of marketers who are learning to code to try build cool tools for themselves, for the organizations they work for, and try kind of like take that leap into the next 5-10 years of marketing, when things are just going to have to be a lot more automated for us to be able to win, whatever winning is. So if you're interested in coding and you don't know where to start, head over to marketerscode.com and sign up and join the community. And I'm there, Antoine's together. We're all there to help. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to our fantastic guest now to show us how it's done.
Okay, perfect. So let me just share my video so you can hear me perfectly and share my screen. Nick, if you can just confirm that you can see my screen, and I will start.
I can see your screen. We are ready to rock and roll.
Perfect. Okay, so today's presentation is about how to become a content king with Python. Just a very quick introduction on the company I'm working for. So you have the context, okay? It's just not to make advertisement for the company, but you can understand the context I'm working on. I'm working for what we call a meta search. So it's a website where you can compare airplane tickets, hotel, car rental, that kind of stuff, but you can't buy directly the ticket on the website. You will be redirected to a partner like, I don't know, eDreams, Kayak, whatever, where you can buy directly the tickets. We are focused on the French market, even if we have a website for the Spanish market, the UK market, and other European markets. And that's it for the company. So when I first joined the company, so at the beginning of the year, one of the tasks, one of the things we had to do was basically to create a content strategy. Okay, the content strategy was mainly to catch up with the competition, because here you have a comparison of the visibility, and it's the same for the traffic, I guess, even if I don't have my competitors' data, obviously, for the blog. So you can see that between Liligo and Skyscanner, you have a huge difference because they implemented a relevant content strategy way before than ourselves. Okay. Yet, even if the strategy was not perfect, the content team was basically publishing content without looking at the data. We have some good positions. Okay. On some good keywords, like this example, which is basically how to track a flight in French. Even if it's not a commercial keyword, it's a keyword we want to rank on, because for branding purposes, if you are visible on every keyword linked to the travel industry, whether it's the flight part, the car part, the hotel part, it's good for the brand, because we want to be at some point the top of mind in France, at least for our sector. So that's definitely some keywords, some rankings we want to maintain. So basically the content strategy consists, at least for the blog, in two things. The first one is to fill the gaps we have in the content between ourselves and our competitors, like the example we saw before with Skyscanner. But at the same time, we also want to maintain the rankings we have, because it's not very useful if you are increasing your traffic of the new content you're creating, but at the same time you are decreasing on the past content. So the idea is to maintain an increase on both of them. Okay, so today's presentation is about this problematic: how to maintain rankings. Something that is also known as the content decay. So the content decay is basically you publish a content, I don't know, at the beginning of 2019, perfect, it works, you get up to, I don't know, 2,000 sessions a month, and then it starts to decrease. Why? Because your content is not up to date anymore, because you have, I don't know, a new legislation or whatever, or just because a competitor creates a better content than yours. So you were in the first position and now you are in the second position, and hence you get less traffic. So it's perfectly normal. And actually, you have a really great tool that you can use for free. I just include the link at the bottom of the screenshot. It's called Revive. It's done by the folks at Animals. So basically, it's a tool, an online tool where you let the tool access to your Google Analytics data. So it's just a view only. Don't worry, they won't modify anything. And they will take the data and they will analyze it for, I think it's between 12 hours and 2 days. It depends on the amount of data you have. And then they will send an email with, like the example you have just here, where they will say, okay, so this content, we detected that you have a content decay. It's a basic tool, you know, you don't have the level of data I will explain today, but to convince or to explain what is content decay to the top management, it's super cool because it's super visual. And that's actually something I did, not at my current company, but the previous one, to explain the concept. And when you have, you know, these fancy graphs where you explain, okay, we were at the top, now you are at the bottom, and you can see all the phase, it's super easy to convey the idea, to convey the concept of the content decay. So why focus on maintain the ranking? I explained that, but a lot of companies are just focusing on creating the content. So the first pillar I mentioned at the beginning. Why? Because it's like the politician, you know, when you have a bridge that is built, you have a bunch of people showing up for the inauguration. You know, we've been working on this bridge for 2 years, and now we can use it, okay? But then when you have to maintain the bridge, you know, I don't know, you have a hole in a wall or whatever, they won't show up to, hey, we finished this task, you know, we had a hole in the wall, that's perfect. No, because it's not as impressive as an inauguration. And for companies, for content, it's exactly the same. You always focus on creating something because, you know, you have this kind of wow effect. It's exactly like this. If you say, okay, created a new content, it's like, wow, super, a new content, a new keyword, it's super interesting or whatever. But if you just say, hey, I updated an existing content because our traffic was decreasing on this keyword, or I updated the internal linking or whatever, it's like, okay, super cool. It's not the same wow effect, and it's a fact, but it doesn't mean that it's not as important as creating new content. Also, it's because you have to ingest and manipulate a lot of data. If you are just looking at the content gap between yourself and the competition, you will have some data depending on the let's say the size of your competitor. You may have to deal with a lot of data, but it's not the same amount as the one you will use when you analyze your performances, because in that case, you will have to download, for instance, the data per day, per keyword. And when you do a keyword research for a new content, it's not as extensive as this kind of data you will have to manipulate if you look at your current performance. It's way easier, okay? And also because it's a time-consuming process. Here is a very simplified process, okay? But you have the main part. It's you analyze your performance, then you break it down per keyword, because you can be decreasing on one keyword but increasing in another one. So it's really important to break it down per keyword. You have to identify underperforming keywords, then identify the issue. Maybe it's because you have a new competitor, because Google just included a new module, for instance, because you have more advertising. It really depends, and then solve it depending on the issue identified in the previous step. Okay. Oh, sorry. Hop. One characteristic is I have is that I'm very lazy. But let's say lazy in the good way is I don't like to do the same thing over and over if it can be done more efficiently. And that's exactly what we are going to see right now. The process I just explained, the 5 steps, the 3 first steps can be automated in a way with what we are going to see right now. The last part can't, because you have to look at the SERP, you have to diagnose the issue, so it's impossible. You have a lot of factors to take into account, but the first part can be. Okay, so the first part is to analyze the content performance. If you will do that manually, basically you will go to Google Search Console, and you will whether use the UI or maybe connect your tool with an add-on for Sheets, for instance, to access directly the data you have in Search Console in Sheets, or maybe an extension with Excel or Supermetrics, whatever. But you will extract the raw data from Google Search Console and then manipulate, create pivot table, whatever, to do the analysis. Okay, it's a process that can be done, okay? But the issue is every time you want to do the same analysis, you have to do everything again from scratch. That's one of the issues with Excel. You have the formula and everything, but if you want to update the analysis, you have to do basically everything over and over again. And in our case, I remind you that we are in several markets with several domains. So if I want to do the exact same analysis for the French market and the Spanish market, I will have to do the same process twice. And that's obviously not something I want to do because the steps are very logical and are the same. So I need to find a more efficient way to realize this analysis. One thing I just want to highlight. So I included, Python to the rescue because that's the language I'm using. But you really have to focus on the process and not the language. If you know how to do exactly the same in PHP, do it in PHP, or do it in JavaScript, or do it however you want to do. It's really important not to focus on the language. I'm using Python because I know how to do it in Python, not in PHP. But if you already know PHP, do it in PHP, and that's it. Really don't focus on the language, but on the process. If you do it with Python, what I explained just before is just to click on a button. So I don't have to do everything from scratch for another market, or because I want to update the analysis I did last month. It's just to click on a button. So the process will be the following one. The first step is to connect to the API because we want to retrieve our data. So at some point we will need the data per keyword. So that's the only, let's say, reliable source we can find to have this data. Then you will have to, get the top URLs. So basically you want to extract, I don't know, the top 100, the top 100, 200. It really depends on your website during last year, for instance. So you analyze your top content, and then you will get the data per URL per day. Why per URL per day? Because if you merge several dimensions, you can't tell to Search Console with the API, okay, I want to get my data from 2019, but on a monthly basis. No, you can't. Or you get everything for 2019, or you get everything and it's per day. So then we will have to resample the data we get to get monthly data. Why monthly data? Because it's easier and you will have, let's say, relevant insights if you compare your data month over month and not day over day, because in that case, it's impossible to get some conclusion. Then from this data, so I remind that at this stage, we have our traffic data, I mean clicks, impression, for every one of our contents for every month. Okay, so January, February, and so on. So for each of these content, we will then get the peak month. So the peak month, it's the month when this content or this content got the maximum amount of traffic. So it can depend on the content, obviously, but you will have the peak month. And then you get the number of months since the peak. So obviously, you won't update a content if you just created it one month ago, or maybe the peak was just last month, and you have at this stage a decrease of, I don't know, 10 clicks. In that case, yeah, you are not in the peak phase. I mean, it's not the peak phase, but just a difference of 10, and you just published it 1 month ago. You are not going to update this content at this stage, you know? Then get the difference between your data for today. I mean, today it's last month. Again, we are comparing month over month, and the peak. So you can, let's say, have a real number to assess the decrease this content is actually experiencing. And then you pick a top, I don't know, 50 or 100 of the worst URLs you have based on your data. So worst, it doesn't mean that they are generating at this moment a very few sessions or very few click impressions, but the difference between the peak phase and the current stage is very high, okay? If you do it manually, so the full process I just explained, again, a lot of time, and it's very, a very tedious process where you have to handle a lot of maybe Excel formula, maybe to pivot sometimes. It will be a mess. It will be a mess. And if you have to do it several times or for several markets, it can really, really be annoying. And if you do it automatically, actually, you have the GIF here. So it's, let's say, the real time you will need to run exactly what I just explained. It's super fast. It's around 10 or 15 seconds for, in that case, it was just for 10 URLs, I think. Obviously, if you do it for more URL, it will take more time, but that's not the time you spend actually doing something. You click on the button, then you do something else. And I don't know, 1 hour after, you go back to this file and you have the result. So it's not active time, it's just the time the machine needs to extract all the data and to make the calculation. But if you have a small website, it's actually super fast because it's a very logical process that we follow. It's always the same. So you can't, let's say, give the instruction to the machine to do the work for you and not do everything with Excel or whatever software you're really using to handle the data. At this stage, so we have the data for our URL, and we know the peak phase, we know the difference, okay? Now we have to identify the underperforming, keywords, because, okay, it's great. I know that this content, we have a difference of maybe 1,000 sessions between the peak month and last month data, but I want to know which keywords are responsible for this decrease, because again, you can increase for some of them, you can decrease. So you have to understand on which keywords you need to work. Okay, so the same explanation, the process. So the first is for every URL we had in the previous step. So I remind that it's the worst URL where you have a huge difference between the peak data and our last month data. You will extract every keyword GSC has in the API for this content. Okay, it can be 10, it can be 100, 1,000. It doesn't matter, because with the system you're using, you won't have an issue with the number of rows like you can have in Excel when you have a limit of 1 million and something. Okay, it can be a lot, but for some websites, and it's actually the case for us, based on the scope of the analysis, we can reach this limit very, very, very fast, okay? And for each of these keywords, this time we won't get all the data for all month. We just want the last month data, okay? So what I call here in the presentation, the current data and the peak data, okay? So I want to know for all my keywords that I have in the GAC API, what's the data for last month and what's the data for the peak month. And then we merge. So it's basically like doing a VLOOKUP, you know, where you will have a first column, the keyword, second column, the last month data, and third column, the peak data. And you calculate the difference per keyword. So it's basically the same thing that we did in the last step, but per keyword and not per URL. And then you will have the keyword where you have a decrease, and you send the final result to an XLS. And this Excel will be the basis of the manual part that you will have to do, which is analyze the search, analyze the competition, what changed between this month and last month, you know, where basically you will have some added value and not to repeat the same steps over and over like a machine, okay? And the final analysis will be something like this. So we run the analysis with one domain that Nick has. So thanks for that, Nick. So where you have the URL in the first column, then the query. the impression peak. So it's the number of impressions you had in the peak month that I decided not to include in that table. But if you want the information, obviously you have it, so you can include it. The impression current, so you can see that for the first row, for instance, we have a difference of around 600 impression, which is actually the number you have just on the right. And the difference, it's not the difference that we have between the peak month and the current month. Is basically we sum all these differences. So we have a negative difference, obviously, where you say that, okay, for all of these keywords where I have a negative difference between the peak and the current month, okay, we will account, let's say, for 10,000 impressions or 10,000 clicks. Okay, so the percentage you have here means that almost 8% of this difference is for just the first keyword, which is in this case is app marketing agency. So if you look at the first 5 rows, you see at the right, so the sum of the differences, you go to 25%, which means that if I work just on the 5 first keywords, I will work on keywords that account for 25% of the total decrease I had between the peak phase and the current phase. So it's a way actually to prioritize your work. You won't be working on all your keywords, all your URL, because it's a lot of data. I know that if I have to work for this website, I would say, okay, maybe I have to focus my work on app marketing agency and mobile advertising London, for instance. What happened there? Why am I not getting any impression when I was in the peak phase? And that's where you can include this analysis on the work you will do during the upcoming month, where again you will need to find a balance between creating new content and updating, modifying, or whatever existing ones, so you can keep your rankings. And if you do that using this technique, you will have the time, because if you have to spend 1 or 2 days every month to just run the analysis we did in I don't know, in 20 minutes. I mean, if you run the file, it's way faster. You can actually focus. Dedicate time where you add value, not again repeating the same step over and over. Okay. And if you do it manually, that's what I explained. It's super tedious. This part actually is way harder than the first one, because it's way more data, and you can reach Excel's limit very fast, and automatically super fast again. Okay, so what are the benefits of this method? So the first one, I remind that I'm super lazy, and if I want to apply the same methodology for another website, I just have to change here. You have a variable in the file I'm using. Instead of miratrix.co.uk, I can use liligo.fr, for instance, and it will do exactly the same work, and it will work exactly the same, because the process is the same. If you are working in-house for one website, okay, you just have one website. But if you are working in an agency, even if obviously you have to tailor the work you do depending on the context of the client, the industry, but some processes are exactly the same. And I think this one can apply to any client. So you can have one report for client A, one report for client B, but you use exactly the same process. And you can save time, and you can use this time to really focus on what will bring value to your clients. And if you want to do the same analysis this month, next month, the following one, you just have to change a date, and that's it. You don't have to do everything from scratch. So again, you save a lot of time. You have some disadvantages, obviously, otherwise it will be too perfect to be true. The first one is the setup of an automation can take time, okay? If you see that you have a task like this one, that you will do several times, or maybe that you know that if you need to do it just once, it will take days or maybe weeks. You have to calculate the time you would spend doing it manually, and how many hours, how many days you need to build the automation. Okay, because at the end of the day, automation can be cool or whatever, but you need to be efficient in your work. If you spend 2 days automating a process that you will do just once, and it's just for 1 hour, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So you have to be smart. This kind of estimation is not that easy at the beginning, but you have to do it. And if you can do it yourself, maybe ask someone that you know, that know a bit of programming, so you can say, okay, this thing is super basic. I think in 1 hour it's done. Or no, it's super complex because you have to take into account that, and that. Okay. And the first automation, or better say the first automations, will be hard, because if you are still in the learning process, you will lose a lot of time in the documentation, in understanding how it works. So it's not that straightforward. But you have to persevere, because it's a medium-term bet. I mean, the first automation I worked on when I was still working agency side took almost one day and something, and we decided not to charge, obviously, the full time to the client, because I explained, okay, I'm in the learning phase, but I think that if I manage to do that, we can replicate it to other clients, and we will be more efficient in the way we work. And it was agreed upon with the management. But if you expect to build an automation for a task that take you at the moment 5 hours a month in just 10 minutes, if it's the first one, that's not gonna happen. You take time, but it's a medium-term bet, because at the beginning, yes, you will lose some time, but in the medium term, you will save a lot of time, especially for really repetitive tasks, or tasks that you do a lot and a lot. And don't be afraid to ask, because the community is great. Nobody will say, oh, this question is super basic, I don't want to answer. No, because everybody started at the same level of knowledge, which is 0. And you actually have a great community. So you have obviously the Slack marketers with code, but you have also a lot of websites where you can ask your questions. So don't be afraid to ask. And actually, when you ask someone, it's actually a delight to answer this kind of question, because by answering to someone who can be new, it's also a way for you to check that you indeed know the concept. Because if you can explain it to anyone, it's because you master it, basically. In this link, so after, I guess we'll send the presentation, you have the notebook. So if you want to use it by yourself, you can make a copy. Just a quick heads up, you have to configure something at the beginning. Basically, the main thing you have to do is to allow the notebook to access your Google Search Console data. Otherwise, it will be too easy. I just include my competitor's domain, and I can get their data. Basically, it's in the Google Developer Console. You have to create what's called a project, and there you activate the API, you download a file, and the notebook will use the file as a way to identify itself to the API. Okay. If this notebook is interesting for you and you want to run it, and you're kind of stuck in the configuration phase, so at the beginning, don't hesitate to contact Nick or myself. We know how it works, so we can explain it to you. So don't worry about that. And that's it. Do you have any question? So Nick, I don't know if we have
I'm just checking. Yeah, if we have any questions, just shoot them into the Q&A, the bottom right-hand side of Zoom. That was great. That was really. I haven't played with it too much because I wanted to see, like, you tell us like what exactly it does, and I maybe not tomorrow, because in tomorrow it's 27 degrees in Glasgow, which is almost unheard of. So I'm taking a day off and hanging about. But Friday, I'm going to plug that into Search Console. I've got a couple of sites that have like ridiculously large amounts of traffic. and pages, and it would be good just to see if there's anything in there that's been missed by the content team or myself. I wanted to, yeah, most importantly myself. I wanted to ask you. I think you said, did you say it took you a day to build that script?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good considering the impact it's going to have on your job and the impact it's going to have on any site you work on. A day worth of investment's cheap.
I mean, the issue I have with the script at the moment, that's a script actually we built in, I think, in January or February. I don't remember the exact date, but as you know, we have the coronavirus at the moment. So if I run the analysis right now, a new thing. If I run the analysis right now, I will have a decrease on almost every content, because the peak phase will be, even for content published in January or February, because we lived and we are still living a huge decrease in our industry. So that's one of the, let's say, disadvantage of this script. Obviously, you have to include the business knowledge you have. If you are working for an e-commerce website with a strong seasonality around November with the Black Friday, you can have actually the same issue. So maybe exclude this month from your analysis. And in our case, we can't rely at the moment on the data that the script will give you, because the coronavirus basically destroyed the seasonality we usually have. So that's one drawback. If you are in an industry in crisis or living a huge increase at the moment for any reason, I don't know, you are in the football industry, in the newspaper, and usually in August, you have a lot of I don't remember the English name. When a club will buy another player.
Yeah, transfers.
Transfer, sorry. So you have a transfer, so you can have a spike in the traffic. Anyway, you have to take this into account, because we can't include, that's the, let's say, the good thing about the automation. You can automate some things, repetitive tasks, boring things, but you can't include the business knowledge you have as a human in a script. It's super hard. So always remind that, okay, I had a peak in November, but maybe I have an e-commerce website, so it's normal. So maybe exclude November from the analysis.
There could be a potential way to update the script so you can pull out the data, normalize the data at some point.
Yeah.
During the process, that'd be quite cool to think of. We've got a couple of questions. I used GSC and Python collaboration for my work recently to find cannibalization issues. What other projects / applications are there, I'm presuming, to find cannibalization issues?
To find cannibalization, actually you have a lot of things around cannibalization, because let's say the process to find a cannibalization is super easy. It's basically you extract the data, your keyword data again, for a specific month, and you just check if you have some duplicates where you have this keyword for this URL and the same keyword for another URL. So from an automation point of view, it's actually a good project, I think, to start, because it's not too complex. But other projects, links to GAC, I mean, you have a lot. It really depends on the industry and what you want to achieve. You have the cannibalization. You can also find some issue around internationalization, where you will filter your data for the French market and see if you have some English URL showing up, for instance. So you have a lot of things you can do with the GSC data.
There's verticals of cannibalization you could look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Another question. Great presentation, by the way. You're getting a little compliment.
Thank you.
I'm just building a new site. Is there any reason why not to automate from scratch and build this in?
New site.
It's a new site, so this wouldn't work particularly well on a new site. Would it be good for observing things over time?
Yeah, that's the thing. For this script to work, you need the input data, and the input data are the GAC data. And if your website is new, you don't have GAC data, so you can't automate it with this website. I mean, you can automate a lot of things if you are building a new website. Actually, you have some frameworks in Python to build some kind of website, not automatically, but it will be like a WordPress, you know, where you work with template, variable, and that kind of stuff. I actually built one last week, a simple one, just to play around with that. But this process, as you mentioned, is not for new websites because you need data to analyze.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, more coming through. I've never coded with Google Colab, only in editors on my computer, Jupyter, GitHub, etc. Any tips? You can answer that, or I can answer it, because I reckon we'll say the same thing.
It's basically the same. I mean, Google Notebook is actually a version of Jupyter Notebook. You have some slight differences, but basically the same. You can include text in Markdown, and you can include code. So whether, I think in Collab I don't remember if you can use R. I think it's just Python, but I'm not sure. But it's basically the same. I mean, you have the code, you have the explanation, and you can run it. The only difference and advantage, and that's why actually I use it online, is you can access the files you have on your Google Drive, and you can also share it with your colleagues. So you can make a kind of report using the Jupyter Markdown, you know, where you explain, you just say to the person, if it's he or she's not a coding person, say just ignore the coding part, just look at the explanation, and you have the report. And if this person say, okay, please add, I don't know, this graph with the trend year over year, okay, you work on that as you would work on a Word document. So it's shareable, and that's a really, it's a useful thing, especially when you work in a big organization like I do, when the same report will be shared, you know, with the CMO, with the CEO, with some colleagues I have in the same department. But that's the same. You can achieve exactly the same.
Yeah, and there's a good thing about Colab is, so if you're playing around with NLP or doing anything that requires an absolute ton of processing power, you get to use like their top GPUs. So it makes it a lot quicker than doing it locally on your machine. They top out after a certain period of time, so you can only use X amount of GPU, and then they're like, you know, you're having a laugh, pay for it. But if you're doing really heavy processing stuff, you get to use their best GPUs.
The only issue I can see with the Google Colab, it's sometimes it tends to shut down. Like if you have an analysis that will last, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, sometimes it I don't know, it cannot deactivate. You have alternative tool to avoid that. That's the only issue. But in my case, most of the analysis I do last at top 1 hour. So I don't have this kind of issue, but I know if you're working in machine learning stuff, it's kind of annoying.
Yeah, no, I've experienced it quite a lot. It's really frustrating.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, so when you were talking about one part of this couldn't be automated because there's a lot of variables and factors put into place. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, when you're dealing with the factors that would change whether a bit of content is dying or not, are you building data sets that you hold on for later on? So essentially, are you building training sets with that data as you process it? Because what I'm getting at is essentially if you're holding on to that data and continually building it, after you have like 10,000 views of the data, then at that point you can maybe start doing machine learning or predictive analytics on that data.
Yeah, maybe
potentially help move it to that next stage.
Yeah, but the issue I have with the automating the last part is you have a lot of external factors, and I don't really know how we can introduce them in the machine learning process, because you can't include in a machine learning process the fact that Google may or may not include a new module. You know, like in the travel industry, you have now the Google Flight module in every queries. That's not something that you can anticipate using a machine learning model. It's, I mean, some things, yeah, you know, like the seasonality or this kind of stuff, but some things can't. And again, a new competitor, that's not something that you can use trained data to predict. It's, you know, it's random. So I know that you have some tools, I mean, some scripts. For instance, I read an article made by Amlet Batista regarding the facts, I mean, to detect if in the SERP you have this or this module, like the video module, the image module, and then it check if in your content you have a video or you have an image. You know, you have to see if the content is perfect to, let's say, no, it has the mandatory elements to show up in all the modules you have in the SERP. So here, yeah, you can use that, and it kind of automate maybe a bit of the issue. But again, you have to look at the SERP, you have to look at the competition. So I don't know. I'm not an expert in machine learning either, but for this task, I don't know if I would introduce the machine learning, to be honest.